Hey, let me tell you a story about a guy who can fairly be considered the luckiest and unluckiest person to ever live. Now, the reason for this is because he suffered a calamity that has never happened before to anyone, and not only that he survived it once, but he actually managed to survive it twice in a row. So, buckle up, story time. Now, to set the stage, it's 1945 Japan, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi is in Nagasaki, where he lives with his family, and he works for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He is a naval engineer at the time, and he's working on a design for a new oil tanker. Now, on August 6th, he was actually in Hiroshima on what was supposed to be a 3 month work trip, but he was sharing some ideas and working on some new designs with some of his co-workers over there. Now, August 6th was supposed to be the last day of this trip, and on August 6th, they were actually making their way towards the train station to go back to Nagasaki. Now, while they were en route, he actually remembered that he forgot his ID, so he turned around and he went back to the office when something happened, something that was eerie, but something that he heard before. See, he heard a rumbling engine of a plane. He looked up and he saw an American bomber, but this time it was different. See, Japan at the time was experiencing bombardment pretty much since the early days of the war, but this time there was one singular plane, and he saw what he described as a small object falling down from a plane, and it was attached to two parachutes. Now, for a moment he was confused. He was looking up and he was trying to make sense of that whole situation when suddenly he saw a massive bright flash of light that immediately blinded him. Now, instinctively, he threw himself in a ditch that was next to the road, and the next thing that he remembered was a deafening sound of a rumbling, massive explosion that immediately ruptured his eardrums. Now, what followed was a vacuum that was created by that massive explosion. It picked him off the ground, flipped him over, and tossed him into a nearby potato field. Now, at this point, he was confused, his ears are hurting, and whenever he looked around, he would see nothing but a massive cloud of dust and ash and a smell of a scorched earth. Somehow, however, he managed to start walking towards what he assumed would be a dockyard, and on the way, he saw nothing but a complete and utter devastation as far as he can look. Now, finally, he made it to the dockyard, and he was looking for a couple friends, and they actually also survived. So together, they started making their way back to the train station because somebody told them that the trains are actually still running, so they were trying to get out of there, but not before spending that entire night into an air raid shelter. Now, while in the shelter, he actually got to see the full extent of his wounds, which were pretty severe, mostly burnt, and he was in pain and confusion, but ultimately he was lucky that he survived, even though he was still trying to make sense of what just happened. Now, the next day, they managed to get on a train. They were heading back to Nagasaki, and as soon as they got there, he went to see a doctor who was actually his friend from school. Now, because of the extent of the damage that he had, his friend basically didn't even recognize him, and he had to explain him what happened, who he actually was. He managed to bandage him, and he rushed home to see his family. Once he got there, not even his family managed to recognize him. His mother even told him that he's a ghost, because that's pretty much how he looked like, not like a human being. Now, the next thing that happened can actually summarize who he was, because despite the injuries and the pain, he rushed back to his office where he started talking to his friends and co-workers and explaining to them what happened. Now, he was there explaining to his co-workers what actually happened, and they're looking at him, and nobody can actually believe because they've never experienced nor seen anything like it, and even though it is clear that he suffered severe wounds, the story was just too crazy. At that point, the report starts to trickle in town, and the management actually calls him for a meeting where they want him to explain what actually happened. He goes up to the meeting and basically tells them the exact same story, and that is that there was one object that fell out of plane. It was an explosive device of a sort, and it caused a massive devastation. It basically leveled the entire city. Now, needless to say, they also don't believe him anything. They even call him crazy. But here's the thing. Right during that argument, something happens that was only familiar to him. See, right at that moment, he sees a bright flash of light and he hears a recognizable massive explosion. Again, his instinct kicks in and he throws himself on the ground. Luckily, this time he didn't suffer any serious injuries, and as soon as he got up, he rushed right back home to see what's happening with his family. When he got there, he saw that half of his home was completely leveled, but the other half was standing. So he rushed in and he saw his family alive and well. Now, the next night, they're also in a very familiar place to him. They're in an air raid shelter, but this time things are starting to get complicated. See, he survived the bombing twice, but the amount of radiation that he suffered was incredible, and at this point it's starting to take toll. He is experiencing severe vomiting, he's losing his hair, his wounds are opening up, his bandages are dirty at this point, and he's barely holding for his life. Now, right at that moment, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito actually announces that the Japan is surrendering over the radio. But Yamaguchi is a devastated man, and according to his own words, he didn't really feel anything because he didn't even think that he's gonna survive. Incredibly, however, luckily he does recover, and following the end of the war, he actually ends up being a translator for the United States occupation forces, and eventually he returns to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, where he continues to do what he does best, and that is, well, design oil tankers. Now, later in life, he actually had even more children, and he was heavily advocating for the abolishment of nuclear weapons because he actually was one of the rare people who can comfortably say that they experienced the full devastation of this calamity, and he knew how horrifying human mind can be when it is capable to invent something like this. He lived to a fairly old age of over 90, and he passed away in 2010. Now, his story is incredible, and till today, he is the only person that is recognized that survived both nuclear bombings, even though it took a while for the Japanese government to admit and recognize that he was also a survivor of the second one. So, I'm sure that you didn't find this story entertaining because how horrifying it is, but if you want to hear more from me and if you like content from history and science, stick around because every now and then I say something interesting.